Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a pretty bold, honestly somewhat surprising premise about early 20th century history. We're looking at the idea that the catastrophic, globe-spanning events of the First World War actually acted as this massive modernizing accelerator for Ukraine. So, stick with me here, because over the next few minutes, we're going to unpack exactly how a devastating total conflict literally became the crucible of modern Ukrainian nationhood.
Okay, let's kick things off with this really provocative quote from the source material. If nations had passports, Ukraine's year of birth would be recorded as 1914. Now, hold on. This doesn't mean the Ukrainian nation just didn't exist before that date. It absolutely did. But as the text points out, it existed primarily in the imagination of the people living there. Before 1914, it was much more of a shared cultural idea rather than a concrete geopolitical entity.
To really get this, we have to look at the contrast between what the source calls the soft reality and the hard reality. Pre-1914, that's the soft reality. Out of roughly 30 million potential Ukrainians, about 90% were peasants. They definitely shared a culture, but mostly they just had this vague sense of belonging to a broader national community. But then, the war hits, and boom, it forces a hard reality. The absolute total mobilization of World War I violently forged that soft cultural concept into a hard, undeniable geopolitical reality.
All right, moving on to Section 1, the ultimate strategic prize. Let's look at why this specific land was so fiercely contested.
Geographically speaking, Ukrainian lands were sitting right in the crosshairs of Europe's major powers. It was this vast, crucial frontier wedged directly between the Russian Empire to the east and the Austro-Hungarian Empire to the west. Because of this prime real estate, Ukraine wasn't just another battlefield. No, it was the absolute grand prize of the Eastern Front.
Actually, the British historian Dominic Leaven hit the nail on the head here. He said, as much as anything, the First World War turned on the fate of Ukraine. We really have to keep in mind that this was the world's very first total war, meaning to win you had to mobilize absolutely everything, civilian and military resources alike. Whoever controlled the most resources could hold out the longest. And while this specific region was seen as the literal key to surviving and winning that war of attrition. Just look at this breakdown. It's honestly staggering. This region held a nearly inexhaustible reservoir of resources. You've got bread pouring out of the massive agricultural provinces. You've got coal and iron coming from the Donbass region, fueling these giant industrial war machines. Over in Austrian-controlled Galicia, there was oil. In fact, the German Navy essentially ran their whole operation on Galician oil. And then, absolutely crucial to a total war, manpower. Ethnic Ukrainians were the second largest group in the Russian Empire and the sixth in Austria-Hungary. They provided these massive armies of conscripted soldiers for both sides. Let's talk about one specific mind-boggling number, 16,000 metric tons. That was the record grain harvest of 1913 in the Ukrainian provinces of the Russian Empire alone. Now, in a war where both the 1917 Russian Revolution and the 1918 German Revolution literally started over bread riots, that amount of grain acted like a giant magnet for all the warring empires. It was so critical, you guys, that when the Central Powers signed a 1918 peace treaty with Ukraine, it was officially dubbed the Peace for Bread.
Okay, let's pivot from the economics to the battlefield. Section 2, breakthroughs on the Eastern Front.
When we think of World War I, we almost always picture the Western Front, right? Those static, muddy trenches where the lines never seem to move. British officers used to joke in 1917 that at their current pace, it would take them 180 years just to reach the Rhine. But the Eastern Front, it was an entirely different beast altogether. Out east, the lines were stretched incredibly thin across this massive landscape. This setup allowed for huge, highly fluid movements and these massive, sweeping territorial breakthroughs.
To give you a sense of just how volatile this territory was, let's walk through this timeline. It's basically a chronological whipsaw. In 1914, the war kicks off with a massive Russian occupation of Galicia. Fast forward to the spring and summer of 1915, and Austro-Hungarian units push them all the way back to Volhynia. Then summer 1916 hits, and the famous Russian Brusilov offensive breaks through to the west all over again. And finally, winter 1917 to spring 1918, the Russian Imperial Army completely collapses, and German and Austrian troops sweep right in to occupy Ukraine. The land was constantly, violently changing hands.
And, what exactly happens when a massive front line just keeps sweeping back and forth over your home? You end up with a tragic number like this, 6 million. By early 1917, there were 6 million refugees in the Russian Empire alone. But here is where we hit this fascinating historical paradox. When Russian authorities retreated in 1915, they actually deported Galician Ukrainians eastward, right into Kiev. So suddenly, you have Western Ukrainians and Eastern Ukrainians pushed together by these forced deportations, and they start setting up shared aid organizations. Out of all this massive, tragic displacement, the very first officially Ukrainian institutions actually started to emerge.
Let's look at the sociological heart of all this. Section 3. Modernizing the peasantry.
So, before the war, a typical peasant's world was pretty much confined to their local village. But total war changes all that. It conscripted them entirely. For these guys, the army acted like this massive, modernizing factory. First, they're conscripted. Next, these traditional farmers suddenly have to master modern military technology and industrial-level discipline. Then, sitting in the trenches, they're exposed to intense political agitation, specifically modern socialist and nationalist ideologies. So, they go into this pipeline as traditional peasants at step 1, and by step 4, they're returning home as highly capable, politically active veterans. It's a total transformation.
The source material uses this brilliant analogy to explain it, calling it the Columbus analogy. These peasant soldiers were drafted, thrown on trains, and traveled over these incredibly vast distances. And kind of like explorers discovering a new world, soldiers from the Russian army who occupied Western territories like Galicia were absolutely floored to find that the local people, living hundreds of miles away from their own homes, spoke almost the exact same language they did. It was a massive wake-up call to a shared identity.
Now think about this. Among these peasant soldiers sitting in the trenches, what do you think were the two most highly demanded goods? Well, one was alcohol, which, yeah, is exactly what you'd expect in a brutal war, but the other? The other was Taras Shevchenko's Kobzar, this foundational collection of Ukrainian poetry. That's right, amidst the endless artillery fire, they were devouring literature that was directly fueling an awakening national consciousness. It's just a fascinating little detail.
And to show you just how radically these returning veterans changed the social fabric back home, check out this incredible quote. This is from a letter written to the state newspaper Pravda in 1924 by a very frustrated rural communist. He's complaining that every village now has this politically opinionated, active group of worldly peasants who traveled during the war. He says, now they have all kinds of things to say and make us look like idiots. The old, isolated peasant world was just gone forever. They had seen the world, and they couldn't unsee it.
Which brings us to the climax of the era. Section 4. The intertwined revolutions.
You can argue that the First World War essentially finished the job that the French Revolution started over a century earlier, the total destruction of the old regime. I mean, the conflict started as this traditional clash of sprawling empires and ancient monarchies. But by the time the dust settled, leaders from totally opposite ends of the political spectrum, like American President Woodrow Wilson and Russian Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin, were suddenly both out there proclaiming this entirely new organizing principle for the post-war world: the right of nations to self-determination. Just like that, the era of the Republic had arrived.
But here's the thing. In this specific region, the transition was definitely not clean or simple. The source material defines the Ukrainian Revolution not as one single neat event, but as a dense, totally chaotic intertwining of three massive conflicts happening simultaneously on a strategic frontier. You had a Bolshevik revolution driven by class, you had a national revolution driven by identity, and you had a peasant revolution driven by this deep desire for land and autonomy. All of them violently overlapping in the exact same territory.
And that brings us to a final, pretty profound question to consider today. The really bitter irony of 1918 was that the war to end all wars only managed to ignite a series of even more brutal civil conflicts in Ukraine. So, if the end of World War I was merely the spark for this dense intertwining of revolutions, how does this crucible continue to define the nation's geopolitical reality today? It's a really powerful reminder that the hard reality of modern nationhood is so often forged in the fires of conflict, a reality that, a full century later, is still shaping the region's identity. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.